Welcome, everybody. We're here to present the John Chancellor Award for Excellence in Journalism. I'm Nick Lemon, the Dean of Columbia Journalism School. This award was established in 1995 by Ira A. Lippman, who is here and who you'll meet in person or from the podium later in the evening, founder and chairman of Guardsmark, one of the largest private security service firms in the world. The award honors the legacy of one of the great broadcast journalists of our time, John Chancellor. Thank you, first of all, to Ira, without whom there would be no John Chancellor Award. Thanks, Ira. As always, there are some members of the Chancellor family here, and I'd like to acknowledge them. Mary and Laura Chancellor, daughters of, and Nicholas Gregory, a grandson of. It's not a surprise who won the award, so I'll introduce our winner, reporter and news anchor for PBS and NPR, founder and president of the Futuro Media Group, Maria Hinojosa. I'm grateful to the members of the Chancellor Award Selection Committee for sharing their insights and values, and I'll introduce them later in the evening. When Ira brought the John Chancellor Award to Columbia 8 years ago, he also created the John Chancellor Scholarship at Columbia. Since then, 10 students with outstanding academic achievement and the leadership qualities of John Chancellor have received the scholarship. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's Chancellor Scholar, Crystal Grow. Crystal? Crystal is a writer, photographer, and musician from New England who is currently a Master of Arts student in the Arts and Culture program at the Journalism School. She graduated from the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts and has written for local community newspapers. She's researching photography, archiving, and American history at this school. Thanks, Ira, for paying tribute to the memory of a great journalist by generously supporting the education of new ones. Helping students learn to practice good journalism is an important gift with lasting impact. We're going to start the ceremony, which is really exciting, and if you haven't, a lot of you have been here before, but some of you haven't, and this is different from other journalism awards in ways that you'll see, but that's going to be after dinner. Right now, just enjoy your dinner and the people you're sitting with, and then I'll come back up to this podium and start the show in a little while. Thanks again, everybody, for being here, and a warm welcome.
This election always reminds me of 1960 when I was a young man back in South Dakota sitting in my parents' small living room in a working class community, glued to the screen for the Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy election count that went until 8 o'clock in the morning Central Time. And at the end of that long night, having been a political junkie since I was 10 and a political science major and working in journalism already, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And I loved Huntley and Brinkley and the informality of their exchanges with their team, which included this bespectacled young man from Chicago who they called Jack Chancellor. They would always say, well, what does Jack have? And he'd look like a schoolboy over in the corner as he'd be putting up the numbers and talking about it. So now, fast forward to this auspicious occasion and this extraordinary year that we've been through, and I've been thinking about how much Jack Chancellor, my friend and colleague, would have loved this year, because he loved nothing more than the excitement and the unpredictability of the news. And if you're a journalist, you can hardly ask for more. In fact, you may be inclined to ask for a little less than what we've been through this year. think about the fall alone, and before I take it off, I'll just tell you that the Brokaw theory of American politics, which has served me pretty well over the years, is that at the beginning of the election year and then on a regular basis throughout, always remember the UFO theory. The unforeseen will occur, but I don't remember a year in which so many UFOs did land in our midst. Beginning in the fall, obviously, when the president didn't show up for the first debate, and then Benghazi, Sandy, the last debates, election night itself, and now the post-election period. Welcome to your second term, Mr. President. Two of your best-known four-star generals have been exchanging thousands of pages of emails with, at this point, two women that we know of. Who knows where it goes from here? But I think what John would be so impressed with is the pedigree and the work of our recipient, Maria. She is so many ways emblematic of the new world in which we all live. She's a Latino journalist and a woman, born in Mexico, but raised in John's native Chicago. So it all comes together on this occasion. The landscape of America is dynamic. It's constantly changing. And I can't think of a better time to be a journalist than right now, given the change that we are all witness to and the consequential effect of that change on our lives, not just as journalists, but across this country. So it's going to be a very exciting time. And then my final thought is to leave you with this. I think that the big message of this election, the undergirding, if you will, is that the country said to politicians of both parties and all ideologies, find a way to work together, be bold, challenge convention, and tell us what we need to know and how we can participate. That extends to all of us as well. There has never been a greater challenge for journalists in the last 25 years than there is now, given the new shape of the world and the new shape of the American electorate and the challenges that are before us. But as long as we have the likes of Maria in our midst, we're going to be up to it. And so at this advanced stage of my life and my career, I always take great heart on these occasions. And Maria, I just want to say to you, on behalf of my late friend John Chancellor, congratulations, Godspeed, and thank God for reporters like you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Would the board members who are present please stand? Steve Kappas, Mary Chancellor, John Dodson, Hank Klibanoff, Ira Lippman, Michelle Norris, and Lynn Scher. Thank you. It might be worth, as we've gone on with this program, we're starting to accumulate absent friends, unfortunately, but it's inevitable. Two that I'd like to just remember for a moment, who were key members of the Chancellor Board and aren't with us anymore, are David Halberstam and Jack Nelson. Without them, we wouldn't be here, really. I'd also like to welcome two of our previous Chancellor Award winners who are here with us tonight, Robert Siegel of NPR and Henry Weinstein, formerly of the Los Angeles Times. Thanks for coming. So when I go out in the evenings, my children often note that there are a lot of journalism awards. So sometimes I think of creating a routine where we say, how is this journalism award different from all other journalism awards? But the John Chancellor Award really is different. This award honors sustained excellence over a long period of time and recognizes reporters who have shown a commitment through the years to covering difficult stories. It honors journalists who consistently produce the highest quality reporting day in, day out, without compromise. journalists whose work has had a significant impact for the public good, and our winner tonight is such a reporter. Maria Hinojosa is a truly groundbreaking journalist who has covered America's untold stories and highlighted critical issues at home and abroad for the past 25 years. On her weekly NPR program, Latino USA, and on PBS, she has informed millions of Americans about the fastest growing ethnic group in the United States. In October 2011, she became the first Latina to anchor a frontline report on PBS. Lost in Detention explored abuse at immigrant detention facilities, garnering attention from Capitol Hill to both the mainstream and Spanish language media. Maria launched the Futuro Media Group in April 2010 with the mission to produce multi-platform, community-based journalism focused on the cultural diversity of the American experience. Through her career at NPR, CNN, and PBS, Maria has reported hundreds of important stories, from the riots in Crown Heights to immigrant work camps in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, to teen girl victims of sexual harassment on the job, and stories about the poor in Alabama. Her investigative journalism holds the powerful accountable. As a reporter for NPR, Hinojosa was among the first to report on youth violence in immigrant communities. During her 8 years as CNN's urban affairs correspondent, Hinojosa took viewers into neighborhoods that had rarely been shown before on television. She's a graduate of Barnard College and a former reporter for our campus radio station, WKCR. Maria, welcome back to Columbia, and welcome to your family and friends who are here tonight. Now I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker of the night, who is here to help us uphold a tradition of this award. Every year, we invite someone who knew John Chancellor to talk about him and his legacy. Our speaker this year is a longtime staff writer at The New Yorker and the deadline poet for The Nation magazine. He's the author of many books, including most recently, Quite Enough of Calvin Trillin, 40 Years of Funny Stuff. I want to say a couple other things. First of all, we have one very wealthy member of our faculty at the journalism school, Victor Navasky, who, as Mr. Trillin has pointed out, made his fortune by underpaying Bud Trillin in his role as poet for The Nation. We haven't been able to persuade Victor to make a gift to the school from the fruit of your labors, but hope springs eternal, and I know he's grateful for how well he's done with you working for so little money. I was going to give an introduction. There was a wonderful phrase in the Washington Post the other day about an item that's kind of in the news these days, and the phrase was, the two shared an interest in fitness and the philosophy of leadership. And I was really going to say, because it's true that Bud and I share those interests as well, but I guess you can't really say that kind of thing anymore. So I'll just say thank you so much for being here, and come on up to the podium.
Thank you, Nick. I always refer to him as the wily and parsimonious Victor S. Navasky. I've always thought that one indication of how deeply committed John Chancellor was to reporting is how much he disliked hosting the Today program. Which most people in television would consider a pretty good job. Actually, he wasn't entirely comfortable being the anchor of NBC Nightly News, which most people in television would consider an even better job. When he announced after a dozen years that he was giving up that post as soon as NBC could find someone to replace him, he said, "It may be the top job, and pay the most money, but it's not very satisfying to a journalist. I decided that I don't want to measure out my life in 30-second introductions to other people who do the reporting. He was on first meeting not everyone's idea of a reporter. He once described himself as looking like someone who worked for the State Department in the mid-50s but didn't need the money. He had a civility that I regret to tell you is not always associated with our trade. It was particularly not associated with our trade when he started with the Chicago Sun-Times in an era when many people still thought of reporters as coarse men in shiny suits who could be counted on to have a bottle of cheap bourbon in the bottom drawer. He had a love of language. He had disdain for delivering the news in shrinking sound bites and for what is now called dumbing down. I remember hearing him talk wistfully of the days when the National Broadcasting Company had its own symphony orchestra. But he was a real reporter. On television, he demonstrated that first with his remarkable coverage of the Little Rock school integration, where his friendship with one of his Central High School sources, Ira Lipman, led eventually and appropriately to the award we're celebrating tonight. It might seem ironic that his most memorable moment as a reporter did not occur when he was covering events in world capitals or interviewing presidents, but when he was removed by security guards from the Republican National Convention for refusing to give up his place to a group called the Goldwater Girls. But I think it's fitting that it was his most memorable moment because it demonstrated his civility and his grace. As he was being carried out, he didn't shout. He didn't employ what my daughters used to call Daddy's angry voice. He signed off in the customary way with the words that still come to my mind when I think of him. This is John Chancellor, somewhere in custody. Thank you.
Thank you. John Chancellor's legacy, his civility, and his integrity continue to inspire. In that spirit, we honor the journalistic work of Maria Hinojosa, a reporter with vision, tenacity, and courage. Her work is the essence of high-quality journalism. We have a tradition at the Chancellor Award of inviting a group of people who know the recipient well to come to the stage and speak about her. So those people, you know who you are. Please come on up now and sit in these chairs. And then I'll call on you to speak. They're coming. They're coming. First up is somebody who met Maria in her hometown of Chicago some years ago. He's a contributing editor to The Nation magazine and also another contributor to Professor Navasky's Fortune. And we're very fortunate to have him here as at the Journalism School, where he is the executive director of the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, a global resource center and think tank for journalists covering violence, conflict, and tragedy. He's known for his writing on human rights and civil liberties. Please welcome Bruce Shapiro.
Thanks. What a great evening to celebrate John Chancellor and to celebrate Maria and to celebrate journalism. What makes a great journalist? I think that's what we're actually here to ask. Of course, there is craft, and Maria has plenty of that, the mastery of interview and narrative dogged shoe-leather reporting. When we talk about great journalism, we talk about bare-knuckle courage. Maria has that. But there's one other quality that we don't talk about as journalists nearly enough. A great journalist needs to know where she or he comes from. A journalist committed to understanding where she comes from is also attuned to where her sources come from, where her subjects come from, where her readers and viewers and listeners and downloaders come from. Maria Hinojosa's secret weapon from her first days as a student journalist across the street at Barnard, through her great work at Frontline and CNN and PBS and now at Futuro Media, is that she knows where she comes from with a depth and acuity and a constant curiosity matched by few in our business. So, to understand why we're honoring Maria, to understand why Maria is a great journalist, you need to understand where she comes from, and specifically Chicago in the late 1970s, when Maria was a teenager. I was lucky enough to be a student journalist and a bit of an activist at the University of Chicago in those years. Made a little bit of trouble with Maria's older brother, Raul. And we met briefly, I think, when Maria was a senior in high school. It was an era when the old political machine of Richard Daley was collapsing under its own weight. It was a time when community organizations, neighborhood groups, tenant groups, consumer groups were shaking up power relations all across that great city. And it was a time when Chicago residents, long neglected and taken for granted, the city's African-American community and particularly the Latino community, were asserting their presence with a new, muscular community voice. To understand Maria and her journalism, you need to understand, I think, two Chicago neighborhoods. The first is Hyde Park, where Maria and her family lived, where she went to high school, the University of Chicago Lab School. Hyde Park in those days was a hotbed of civic and political engagement, with the most granular neighborhood struggles over housing or development seeming to mesh inextricably with the great transnational human rights battles of the Cold War, particularly in Latin America. It was an era when crossing the campus to get to your class or to go to morning coffee one day in 1979, which was your senior year, right? You'd encounter an ecstatic handwritten sign from the Organization of Latin American Students, "Somoza fell today, Pinochet is next." If only it had been true. It was a neighborhood where you could turn on the radio at 10 o'clock every single morning and hear Studs Terkel conducting beautiful interviews with all sorts of folks. There are those of us whose educations have been shattered. I don't speak German today because my German class coincided with Studs' interview program, and I would much rather listen to that. And a neighborhood where a university prize in 1979 to a former defense secretary could explode into a raucous street protest and encounter with Chicago police. That was Maria's senior year of high school, I believe. And then across town is another neighborhood, Pilsen. Then and today, one of the largest and great Mexican-American communities in the United States. The first great northern outpost for Mexican emigres after Texas. It was a neighborhood then and is a neighborhood now where the great public mural tradition of Mexico is alive on the streets. The colors of Rivera and Orozco and Siqueiros constantly renewed on the walls of warehouses and stores and libraries. A neighborhood which in the 70s was alive with community organizations, groups like Pilsen Neighbors Community Council and La Raza Unida, which sometimes would fight with one another, but were also loudly agitating for new schools, all of them, and decent wages in tortilla factories and better representation of public office. It was a neighborhood where a young journalist could encounter a guy like Rudy Lozano, a youthful organizer for the International Lady Garment Workers Union, who was murdered in his home, still in his 20s, after nearly getting elected alderman and helping Harold Washington get elected mayor. Pilsen in the 70s and early 80s was a neighborhood where Mexican Chicago, Latino Chicago, asserted its identity with a voice and creativity which changed Chicago's politics and culture forever. Now, Maria, of course, has been a New Yorker for decades, but when I look at the sweep of her work, from child brides in South Asia to 9/11 victims here, from the community voices represented on Latino USA, to the richness of her PBS interviews with artists and intellectuals, I find the map traces of both of those great Chicago neighborhoods of Hyde Park and Pilsen. And I think also of the words of Pilsen's Rudy Lozano, who I was also privileged to know. There are no great men or women in the world, only great challenges that ordinary people must take on. Maria's work exemplifies that credo, and we are richer for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Our next speaker is a senior producer at CNN, where she has produced documentaries and co-authored books and articles with Soledad O'Brien, including Latino in America and Beyond Bravery, The Women of 9/11. She started her career as a print reporter at the Daily News, and she shared a Pulitzer Prize for spot news reporting at Newsday for team coverage of a subway crash and its victims in 1992. She has also won 2 Emmy Awards and is a graduate of Barnard College. Please welcome Rose Arce.
That biography, of course, omits the highlight of my career, which was the many, many years I worked with Maria Hinojosa as a team at CNN. In what is still the longest relationship of my life. We were together for a very long time, Maria and I. So long, in fact, that when I started to work with Maria, she was pregnant. And when I stopped working with Maria, I was pregnant. And somehow she left me when I was pregnant. How low is that, right? But during those years, we did an enormous amount of work together, and it's work that I look back on not only with a lot of love and fondness, but it's work that I continue to do, that she continues to do, and that unfortunately too few of us continue to do. We really did more than just work together. I think in many ways we were on a personal mission, and it's a mission that started here at Columbia, and we were both at Barnard, and she was with KCR, and I was with Spectator. We're part of different cliques. But, you know, one of the wonderful things about going to a place like Columbia University is that you come away with that sense of, I can do anything I want. All my dreams can be realized. Any story that I want to tell can be told. And then you walk out of there, and then the first few years of your career, you realize this is like this big fat lie. Like you really actually can't accomplish perhaps everything you want to accomplish, and people are going to say no to you a lot. And Maria and I, when we started together, we were in a profession that said no to us a lot. And they particularly said no to women of color a lot, and stories about people of color a lot. And they still do sometimes, quite frankly. But we had this mission, and that was that we had come into journalism in an environment like so many of you, like, you know, a lot of people who love journalism, with this idea that journalism was about telling stories that people hadn't heard before. And the only difference between us and everybody else is that we were telling stories about people that nobody had ever heard before, in addition. And that's harder sometimes. It's harder to get those stories into the main. And we were both very much devoted to this idea that those stories were going to get told anyway. And we had a lot of success with it. You know, frankly, we were driven to tell them anyway. We were driven by conviction, and we were driven by enthusiasm. And I'm going to add a word that's a really dirty word for women of colors to say, because we never want to be sort of associated to that word, and that's anger. We were angry sometimes. We were like phenomenally angry sometimes, but we channeled that anger, and we would say, we really think this story needs to be told. And, you know, by golly, we're going to make sure that it does get told. And so in a combination of that anger, the conviction, by her talents, her sheer talent, and my stone-headedness, we were able to convince CNN to put a lot of these stories on air. And the beauty of it is that when you do that and you're able to do it well and successfully, people turn around and they see the value of that work, and they see the value of letting those voices breathe. And, you know, And it built, and it built, and we had a wonderful time together. And we told some incredibly memorable stories. We told the story of a Girl Scout program for Girl Scouts whose mothers were in prison, which was, you know, totally uncharted ground, where they would take these little girls and put them in buses and take them to this like high security prison. And they'd have troop meetings. And the troop was the daughters of these women that were serving hard time. And you know, that wasn't a story that was easy to get on the air, but it was totally worth it. And one that you know, drew an enormous amount of attention. We told stories about the white poor and often overlooked community in a time when everybody was looking at the two of us and saying, give us more stories about blacks and Latinos. And we were like, okay, we're going to do a story about the white poor. And, you know, we did it anyway, and it was wonderful. And one of the lingering memories that I have about Maria is that Maria was sort of like, you know, the trifecta of journalistic tools. And so we would go into a story, and, you know, number one was talking the person into talking. And Maria was just brilliant at that. You know, I mean, just brilliant. She was one of those I can squeeze blood out of a stone thing. And so people would say no, and she'd say yes. And they'd say no, and she'd say yes. And they'd say no, and she'd say, you know, I really like you. And they'd say no, and she'd say, God, you're like my best friend. And I'd say no, and then she'd relate some like out there human experience. And suddenly this person was like not only talking to us, but we were all going to Maria's house for dinner after the shoot. And we were having Christmas together. And it was, you know, we'd have this whole relationship. And then number two of the they're going to talk to us was getting them all comfortable. And then number three was Maria's killer question. And you know, there's some journalists that have a killer question. If any of you watch Piers Morgan, he always does that thing of, have you ever been properly in love? You know, that thing, and that's like his question. Maria's question was, what's going on inside for you right now? I don't know how many of you have worked with her and have remembered her saying that during an interview. What's going on for you inside right now? So on my way here, I Googled, what is going on for you inside right now? And Hinojosa. Don't use the H. Hinojosa. And I got 8.2 million hits for this, right? And I thought, well, this isn't fair because that includes Raul, that includes all the Hinojosas in history. So let's narrow it down. So I put quotation, for those of you who have done your Google school, in quotations, Maria Hinojosa, and in quotation, what's going on for you inside right now, unquote. 5.7 million hits I got on this, right? So I started going through the 5.7 million hits and thinking, I don't have a lot of time, I got to get to this dinner. And I started coming up with another phrase that came up as a profound historic moment. And Maria had 7,350 profound historic moments over the course of her career. And they spent this year alone, October 8th, July 26th, July 12th, and May 28th, she had profound historic moments. And then December 1st of 2001, she had a profound historic moment that was so large, she shared it with Jeff Greenfield and Ray Suarez twice. She had profound historic moments in the Appalachian Mountains and the Adirondacks and Mexico. Numerous times in Mexico, she had a profound historic moment. She had a historic moment in Niger. Is it Niger or Niger? I don't know, because I know with you the pronunciation. March 2008, she had a profound historic moment that was so profound that the comments on this story were, you know, there's a whole group of people, I don't know, that follow Maria Hinojosa that are obsessed with the fact that she insists on pronouncing her name properly. It really pisses them off. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of these comments, but it's unbelievable. Like, they will not have even listened to the story that she told, but they are angry that she will not pronounce the H like Americans pronounce the H. So they went nuts. On May 30th, 2012, over this Africa thing, Niger, Maria Hinojosa insists on pronouncing her name. So March 2008, she declared that the entire world had had a profound historic moment. And it was chronicled, in fact, in the Huffington Post in 2010. They can be a little late on something, but they wrote about her 2008 moment in 2010, the profound historic moment. In March 2008, she also had a profound historic moment with some students in California. She said, I think we're sharing a profound historic moment together. Sonia Sotomayor, major profound historic moment. But, you know, we had one profound historic moment together that I want to end with, and it's interesting that this came up as I was Googling, actually I was re-Googling. I don't know what do you call that, a re-Google or re-Giggle or something like that. Anyway, I re-Googled, and was trying to narrow this thing, and I found this profound historic moment. And what's so ironic about it, this is so Maria, because she's always having these cosmic moments where something recalls something else. And so I had a cosmic Maria moment, and my cosmic Maria moment was that I was woken up in the middle of the night the other night thinking about a story that we'd done together that was actually, on a scale of stories, was the most disturbing story I've ever done. And it came up in this search, and it was in September of 2004, and we were doing one of the many anniversaries of the September 11th tragedy. And she mentioned that this was a profound historic moment then. And it was the story of a guy, and the reason it comes up now is because we just had the anniversary of the plane that crashed in Breezy Point that was full of Dominicans in the days following September 11th. It was like sort of a second wave of the tragedy, this bizarre, terrible thing that happened. And Maria and I wanted to do a story about it. And this was another one of these situations where we left the office, and Maria would say, this is a story. And I'd say, Maria, it's a story, but we're never going to get it on CNN. It's not a story for CNN. She goes, I know it's not a story for CNN, but I really want to get it on CNN. And then we'd sort of argue about it, and she'd say, okay, Rose, I need you to get on the phone and get this story on CNN. So then I would play like the bad cop, and I would like convince everybody, and I would be, we're going to be doing this, and we're going to do this, and when you see it, it's going to happen. And then she'd get on the phone, she'd say, listen, I'm really feeling the story. I'm telling you, something is really going on inside for me right now about the story, and I'm telling you, this is going to be great. And I got the phone and I said, look, we are coming back with a story. You know, we do this whole thing, and we convinced them to do this. And it was a story of a Dominican man who had been trapped beneath the buildings on September 11th. He was working there, and he'd had this horrible life-changing experience. You know, it was an experience that unfortunately too many people had that day, where they spent most of the day thinking that they were going to die. And then they managed to escape, yet didn't feel fully like a survivor. Like something had died in the experience. Their body had not died, but something had really died that day. It was just, you know, horrifying. And then he had come home, and in a panic, as we were all in a panic after September 11th, he had decided to send his wife and children to the Dominican Republic because he just wanted them out of the country. And the plane crashes. And so he loses his wife and kids on this plane after having survived September 11th. And so the two of us were actually struggling over whether this story was just too awful to tell. And the profound, you know, moment that we had with it was when he started to tell this story. And I said to her, you know, he's too upset. I don't think he's going to say anything to us that we can really use to tell a story. And then what story would we tell? And Maria said, what's going on for you inside right now? And I immediately was just like, oh my God, what's going on? This man is as unhappy as anybody could ever be. You know, how do you express that? And what he said to her, what is going on for me right now is that I am thinking about not my wife. It was an incredibly honest answer. Not my wife, not myself, not my older child, but my 2-year-old. I don't know, Maria, if you remember this, but all he could think about was his youngest child, because he remembered things that are haunting for a parent. He remembered the smell of the little girl and the way she climbed into bed with them. And he would say, you know, I can't get past that memory. That is so awful that the rest of it is just too awful to add to it. And Maria wrote this unbelievably beautiful story about this man that really wasn't about him at all. It was really about grief. It was really about pain. It was really about the experience of pain. And it really, you know, breathed life into that story and made us all sort of share for a moment what this was like, and to just sort of acknowledge that some things you just can't process. And that is, I think, the beauty of Maria's work, is her ability to not just to get people to talk to her, but to have these profound historic moments, to take these profound historic moments and give them life. So I celebrate this award for her.
Thanks, Rose. Next, we'll meet the man who interviewed Maria for her first job in journalism as a production assistant at NPR for a show he helped develop with Scott Simon called Weekend Edition. At NPR, he went on to become a senior vice president for programming and a senior producer at CNN. He spent 14 years as a producer at CBS News, 5 of those at 60 Minutes, where he produced stories with Mike Wallace. Today, he's a producer for Rock Center with Brian Williams at NBC News. Please welcome Jay Kernus.
This is a really nice bat mitzvah. Thank you for inviting me to it. I've had the honor of working with Maria at NPR and a few years later at CBS television, so it means we can nod knowingly at each other, and a lot of history immediately passes back and forth. Some 27 years ago, Scott Simon and I sat at a table for nearly 2 weeks and asked each other a series of questions about what the sixth day of Morning Edition might sound like and how to incorporate Scott's take on the world into this new program. We actually wanted to produce the Saturday version of Weekend Edition from Chicago, Scott's beloved hometown, but the news director at the time, award winner Robert Siegel, he paired Scott and me to create the program, and he felt that we needed adult supervision. So the show stayed in Washington, but that didn't stop us from producing a broadcast that had a lot of Chicago flavor. I asked Scott if he had any specific producers in mind, and given that the budget was a luxurious head count of about 8 staff members, it meant that each producer needed to do everything, to be a superb booker, field producer, tape editor, who also understood everything about finding worthy ideas, interviewing, story focusing, writing for the ear, building short radio documentaries on a dime. If we sent you to Chicago, you had to come back with at least 2 stories, no matter what the assignment was. So on a yellow pad, I wrote down a name from Scott that I had never heard before, Maria Hinojosa. Last week, I phoned Scott and asked him why Maria was at the top of the list back then. And without a pause, as if it were still 1985, he recounted her spectacular range of interests, her deep commitment to journalism, and her infectious enthusiasm for covering stories about people whose stories were not being told. And although Scott didn't say this aloud, that Maria came from Hyde Park, it was definitely a plus. She already knew how to speak Scott's language: Cubs, Bears, Jane Addams, Lorraine Hansberry, a bunch of dailies, Studs Terkel, Saul Bellow, etc. Back to point number 3, the infectious enthusiasm for reporting about people whose stories were not being told. To get those stories on the air, you had to first find them. It's not as if you could simply clip them from the New York Times or the Washington Post and, as was too often the case with others, announce at a news meeting, here's a different idea that I found. You actually had to see the world differently. You had to work sources that others didn't have, and listen carefully when those involved in news events were saying, that interpretation may not be true for some people, or that's not what I experienced, or what others may be experiencing. You had to actively avoid the cliche, the generalization, and the pack thinking that can surround coverage. And to actually get those stories on the air, you also needed the kind of courage I saw Maria display day after day, year after year. As you know, editorial meetings can be harsh and unforgiving. At NPR and at CBS, I watched Maria stop the discussion with such phrases as, you know, there's a story we're missing, or, you know, what you just said about that story may not be true, or, you know, that's not exactly what the word means in Spanish, or my favorite, what the hell do you think we're doing here? I cleaned up that last question. You don't become popular in a newsroom when you push against its culture or conventional wisdom, but Maria made her case passionately every time and ignored the head tilting and eye rolling that could occur even during the most enlightened editorial sessions. Despite some frustration, she had lots of victories, stories that would never have reached air unless she had fought for them. And of course, she still fights for these stories every day. It should also be noted that Maria's career represents 2 remarkable crossings. In radio and then in television, she crossed the almost impenetrable wall from the producer ranks to reporter and host positions. And Maria did it in a rare and admirable way. You know, as with many of you in the room, most of my career has been involved in storytelling, but much of it has been dedicated to making sure that reporters and anchors had what they needed to be smart and wonderful on the air. And for reasons we all know, some of those on-air people every now and then get crazy. Researchers say it might have something to do with repeated exposure to the red light on top of the camera. It also may be caused by the act of having to make complete coherent sentences from a remote location during a live broadcast while someone is screaming in your earpiece. Nonetheless, Maria has somehow managed to become a nationally revered and trusted personality who is still sane. It is an enormous accomplishment. And for those of us who have worked with you, we are eternally grateful that you have remained so human. Audiences believe in what Maria says and believe in her because she has remained authentic and curious and caring. Congratulations on receiving the Chancellor Award and for all you have done.
Our next speaker is the President and Chief Executive Officer of PBS, the nation's largest non-commercial media organization, with more than 350 member stations throughout the country. Prior to joining PBS in 2006, she served for more than a decade at the Educational Broadcasting Corporation, the parent company of New York's local PBS stations, 13 WNET and WLIW, where her ultimate position was Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. She is a director of the International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences and a member of the board of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History. Please join me in welcoming Paula Kerger.
It is truly an honor to represent my colleagues in public broadcasting and PBS to pay tribute to you, my dear friend Maria. And I'm so pleased that Steven Segaler, who's the head of content for WNET and has worked so closely with you, is also here tonight. You are so very special to all of us. You have an amazing mix of curiosity and intelligence and tenacity and grace. I don't even mind when you pursue me through a room, tugging at my sleeve. Please, please, I want to talk to you. I have this great idea. And you know, even though Maria is not a woman of great stature in terms of size, she's a larger-than-life presence in any room. And certainly when you have an idea, she feels like she's everywhere all at once. She's enthusiastic, she has unparalleled energy, and she is so deeply devoted to her family and talks about them with such great pride and joy. When I started working with Maria, it was at WNET, and she joined the team there to serve as a senior correspondent for Now and PBS. She hosted her own Emmy Award-winning interview series, Maria Hinojosa, One-on-One. I don't even want to say your name now. I'm now so intimidated. And she has brought such an amazing array of people in front of her and has, in her own extraordinary style, brought the discussions to the American people in a way that's compelling and intelligent and exciting. Her reporting really has covered the breadth, and so much of it has already been mentioned tonight, so I don't want to repeat it. But I would say that her skill in navigating through everyone from Noam Chomsky to the Queen of England is really quite apparent. And then in 2010, she formed the Futura Media Group with a mission to produce multi-platform, community-based journalism that respects and celebrates the cultural richness of the American experience. I was really proud that Maria brought to us this fall America by the Numbers, which I thought was an extraordinarily important addition to our election coverage. And I think that when I look at this project, which was the first, and I'm actually embarrassed to say this, it was the first public affairs program on PBS to be both executive produced and anchored by a Latina woman. But I can tell you it certainly won't be the last. If I had to sum it up, I don't think it's hard to find a common thread that runs through all of Maria's projects. No matter where she goes or who she talks to, Maria manages to invoke our common humanity and shine a light on our shared experiences. She gives voice to the voiceless and speaks truth to the powerful. I think that when I reflect on all of her stories, the one constant is that they remind us at our core that we are all one people and one family. Over the years, I've known her as one of the most exceptional human beings, but the thing that shines through with Maria is her warmth. She embraces everyone, literally, and everything that she takes up. And I like to think that we're all part of her extended family, and I want to say to you, my dear friend, we're certainly proud that you're part of our PBS family. And so tonight, I want to say it gives me great pride to call you mi hermana. Congratulations, Maria, who always is the woman with the best shoes in the room.
Now we'll hear from John Guardo. Today, John is an associate producer with NPR, but when he met Maria back in 1990, he was a member of a gang, and she was reporting on street violence in New York City in the wake of the stabbing death of Brian Watkins. Maria's reporting offered new insights into the root causes of youth violence, and the encounter would be life-changing for John. In the story, Maria profiled John, then called Juan, and other members of a gang in Queens who spoke candidly about why they committed crimes. In an excerpt we'll hear now, John opened up to Maria about a recent mugging. I think we're going to play a clip now.
I became a little nervous as Juan went on to describe what happened the night they decided to, in his words, get paid. Getting paid is the street term for acquiring money or goods. He says they saw a guy looking Vic, which in crew language means victim. They decided to go on a mission, which means to assault someone, and then they jumped him. They got enough money for a weekend at the movies and some food.
He's high too, don't mind him.
What are they high on?
Huh?
What is he high on?
Beer or weed, I don't know. Personally, I don't do drugs.
But you do assault people?
Yeah, like, they're good at doing drugs, I'm good at this. I get my anger out doing that, you know what I'm saying?
Juan talks about this violence openly, in the same tone he might use to talk about school or a baseball game. I'm taken aback at first, but as Juan continues to describe how he feels and why he does what he does, I realize he understands it quite well. He's angry about his own family violence, angry about seeing too few realistic opportunities for his future, and angry at himself for not being strong enough to give up his habit of assault as a means for relieving his tension.
I try, believe me, I try art, I try, constructive things. But I don't know, it just don't give me the same feel of release.
What do you feel? What do you feel?
I feel like, like that. That's the only thing I could do to express, like when you fill up a balloon and it's about to pop, and then you just let the air go, without letting it pop. You just go, tss, and that's it. And then it all builds up again. It's like a little cycle and stuff.
Please join me in welcoming John Guardo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. Once again, my name is John Guardo, and I'm an assistant producer at National Public Radio in New York. I worked at NPR for over 2 decades, and during that time, I've had the opportunity to meet with and interact with a number of important people: authors, scientists, politicians, movie stars. I've also had the opportunity to write and produce my own radio work. At the office, on the wall behind me, hangs the Peabody Award presented to NPR New York for our news coverage for September 11, 2001. I am very appreciative of the life that I have. But it wasn't always this way. Things were very different for me over 20 years ago. Back then, I was a scowling kid running the streets, trying to keep my head above a flooding sense of disenfranchisement and the anger that came paired up with it. Where other young people had some idea where they were going in life, I was lost in making the wrong choices, heading from bad to worse. Then, one day, a radio reporter strolled into my neighborhood. She wanted to ask me some questions. This was very unusual for me because at that point in my life, I was utterly convinced that no one really cared about me and even less about what I had to say. To my eyes back then, it seemed as if everything around me hinted, if not outright confirmed, that I was a nobody. That reporter's name was Maria Hinojosa. She began to interview me, and I vividly recall how a deep part of me felt quenched by her genuine interest and concern. Before that, no one had ever really asked me about my life or really listened to what I had to say. Now here before me stood a professional journalist, giving me her full attention. I can still see her squinting before me with a profound and serious curiosity as she patiently waited for me to answer her questions. It was as if her microphone became a fishing net, which she skillfully cast into my being, causing the truth in me to rise and meet the truth in her. A truth which escaped the bounds of her petite frame and permeated the moment. I mean, here was this little woman, alone with a bunch of gang members, armed only with what I've come to know as passion and integrity, but what to us seemed like courage back then. She held her ground as the lion of preconceived ideas about who we were roared at her, and that earned her our trust and respect. Then, after hearing the finished product of those interviews for the first time, it was as if looking in a mirror. I heard myself speak about the bad things that I had done and cringed. I didn't like the reflection of myself that came out of those radio speakers, and upon beholding it for the first time, I became inspired to change. It's been said that if you can help to change one life, you have made a difference. I can confirm through my life that Maria has done just that. When you're in pitch black darkness, all you need is one flash, one glimmer of light to help you assess your position and help you find your way. So I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to you, Maria. I certainly would not be here if it wasn't for your dedication and support. I would like to thank you on behalf of all the muted voices to whom you gave recognition and expression. Thank you for being a sister, for paying it forward, for keeping it real. Thank you for simply being who you are.
Ira Lipman, please come to the podium to present the John Chancellor Award.
In 1957, the Arkansas National Guard was called out to prevent African American children from entering Central High in Little Rock. To cover the event, NBC sent a young journalist named John Chancellor. I became a source for John Chancellor on what was happening at Central High. John Chancellor was my insurance policy, my protection against the world's injustices. Through his reporting, John Chancellor dispelled lies and ignorance. For the first time, the new age of television journalism enabled the world to see the ugliness of racial hatred. And the result was a great advance for the cause of civil rights. That's why journalism is so important today and will be in the future. It is our first line of defense against those who would subject the world to lies and ignorance. By spreading light and truth, journalists have the power and influence to make the world a better place to live in, not just for a few, but for millions or even billions. But it takes courage, character, and integrity. John Chancellor had that courage. Maria Hinojosa does too. John Chancellor is my hero. He was my hero at age 16 in Little Rock, and he is still my hero because he represented the truth. When he agreed to permit us to establish the John Chancellor Award for Excellence in Journalism, he envisioned rewarding the kind of journalism that would say to successive generations, this is the sort of work to which we should dedicate ourselves. Maria Hinojosa's work meets that test. She has championed the principles that make society more hospitable to both tolerance and truth. Maria, we honor the memory of John Chancellor by honoring your work. You have our admiration, our gratitude for your contributions to journalism and to society. Maria. In tribute to the life work of John Chancellor, I am pleased to present you with the John Chancellor Award for Excellence in Journalism and a $25,000 check.
Of which more than half will be donated back to the Futuro Media Group, which I honor. Wow,
Okay, wow, is all I'm saying. This is really incredible. The only thing that could have made it better is if my husband would be here, but he actually is in Las Vegas because he is being celebrated tonight himself as the official designer of the poster for the Latin Grammys. So he's in Las Vegas, where I will be joining him tomorrow for the official Latin Grammy. So other than that, it all feels really quite dreamy. That's the word that's come up for me, dreamy. It is an absolute honor to be with you. Thank you so much, Ira. It has been my pleasure to get to know you and share our thoughts about the past of our country and the future. Thank you, Jay. He really was the first one who hired me, so it really did start there. And truth is, Jay, that when we were doing the interview, Jay's jaw was kind of like, "You do all those things? And you're a Barnard graduate too?" And I'm like, yeah. It was a fun moment. To Paula, mi hermana, head of a very important network, because I am committed to public media. I'm one of those people. I'm committed to public media, public radio and public television. Thank you, Paula. Mi hermano John, I did not, John, I opened a door for John. John walked through it. I just want to make it really clear. Yeah, I opened it. He walked through it and has walked through it in a way that continues to inspire me. And his daughter is here tonight, which is wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. To Rose, of course, Rose and I, 8 years of, we're going to do this. They'll never take this story. Yes, they will. No, they won't. Yes, they will. We got to do it. We have to do it. We have to. So yeah, it was wonderful, Rose. We had an amazing time, and maybe we'll do it again together. You never know. Dean Lemon, thank you so much for your words. To hear the words about what you think about my career coming out of your mouth from the J School at Low Library, again, it all feels quite dreamy. And thank you to all of the members of the John Chancellor Award Committee for thinking of me, and really especially to the members of John Chancellor's family. That, to me, is incredibly special because it's like we're family. Because the thing is that, you see, I am part of that generation that remembers John Chancellor. I remember him. I remember his coverage on the civil rights movement. I remember watching him closely, like I remember watching Walter Cronkite, Hugh Downs, Garrick Utley, Bill Moyers, Ed Bradley. All of these men, frankly, I remember watching them. And I remember specifically one moment watching Bill Moyers when he was giving a commentary on CBS, and I literally had my face almost pressed against the television set as he was speaking in our kitchen in Hyde Park in Chicago. And I was crying because I was listening to Bill Moyers talking about issues of social justice on the evening news, and I was like, oh my God, they put him on? They let him sit there and he's saying these things? This is incredible. And it was in those moments, watching men like Bill Moyers or Charles Kuralt, that I learned about great American journalism. And it was incredibly inspiring. But the truth is, I didn't see anyone like myself or my family or my experience, whether it was living in Hyde Park or the community I spent a lot of time in, Pilsen in Chicago, El Barrio Mexicano. I just never saw any of this expressed in the media that I was consuming. So journalism was a core value, but I was invisible. Somehow, that kid from Hyde Park ended up at Barnard, and then ended up taking a stroll across Broadway, right here to the campus of Columbia University, and then ended up taking a stroll up the stairs of a building that is gone, that is now, what is it called? Lerner, exactly. For us, I was telling my assistant, who's a Barnard grad, I was like, well, it was FBH. She was like, well, that's a ridiculous name for a building in Columbia. It was Ferris Booth Hall, but that's where WKCR was based. And so that's where it really all began. And that's where I met a man, a kid at that time, called John Abbott, who also was one of the firsts, and who said, what, you speak Spanish and you want to do radio? Come on in. And before I knew it, I had a 3-hour radio show once a week. And John Abbott was my boss. He was the station manager. Then I became the program director. And now John Abbott runs WGBH and PRI. Live radio, the best, although it really was a time when I was younger, because it started at 10 p.m. and went on until 1 a.m. every week. I don't know how I did it. And I give extraordinary gratitude for everyone who helped me along the way. And there are just, I feel like those, Academy Awards, there are just too many people. There are too many people. My family at National Public Radio, some of you who are here tonight, and it is wonderful to see you here, and to be sharing this award with you, Robert, who always would give me a big hug when he's, come here, babushka, and give me where is that, Maria? It's great to see you, Robert. For my friends and colleagues from CNN, Rose, who's holding out there at CNN, my family from PBS, my family from WNYC, from WNET, from WNBC, from KUT, from Latino USA, and now my staff at the company that I formed, the Futuro Media Group, which is steps away on 125th Street in Harlem. My members of my staff, Marty Spaninger, Elena Scotti, Carolina Gonzalez, Deb George, Maria Chaveco, Andres Caballero, Melanie La Rosa, Caitlin Archambault, my assistant Nancy Trujillo, who is a Barnard graduate, and her parents who are here. And I met Nancy while actually covering a story for Latino USA about what it was to be a Mexican teen in New York City. And to our staff interns, Vic and Maya, I think you're here, and I hope I didn't leave anyone else out. This is also about my moment to give immense gratitude for the people who have opened up their lives to speak to me, who told me their stories, who trusted me, John, like you did, with your story. A core value for me as a journalist is this sense of humility and gratitude with people who are willing to share their stories. And this is even though I never met John Chancellor, I never dreamed that I could ever even be in the same space as John Chancellor. But to me, this core sense of humility I got from John Chancellor, from your dad. Because we have to be humble in the fact that people are going to open their lives with us. But as I was telling students today on campus at the J School, I said, yes, so we have to understand humility as a core value of a journalist. But it's also a core value to be tough and to know how to be tough. And okay, the truth is that some of my friends call me something that now all of you will like totally get. They're like, oh yeah, Maria, you're the queen of never giving up. And yeah, that's what it is. And sometimes you have to be tough. So, all right, Rose, you kind of ruined this for me, okay? Because my next line, of course, is, in terms of power and showing power and democracy, we have truly lived through something historic together, something profoundly historic. This new, right? But it's true, we really did. Lynn Scher, who also is an extraordinary role model for me, said, yes, we rigged the elections just so this would all work out just fine, that you as a Latina journalist would be getting the award, and the big story is about the new mainstream in America. Both of the stories that I have been telling consistently in all of these years in my career. But it really is extraordinary, because what we did on our television pilot for PBS, America by the Numbers, was really looking at numbers. And if you look at data, because the truth is, I know none of you are going to be surprised by this, but, well, a couple of things that people say to me are, wow, it's so great to meet you. Why are you so short? Or, it's so great to meet you, but why do you have to say your name in that way? Can you change it? Or, I love the way you say your name. But the fact is that the other thing people sometimes say, maybe those who don't like me, is, yeah, Maria, you and your agenda. You've got this agenda. And because I was inspired by people like Susan Stamberg and Walter Cronkite and Bill Moyers and Scott Simon, I didn't understand when people would say that. I was like, what kind of an agenda? What? Well, yeah, the truth is I do have an agenda. I want to make people feel something with the reporting that I do. And through their feeling of something, I want to make them rethink a misconception that they have. I want to tell stories of the untold. That is my agenda. And I want to hold those accountable, those in power accountable. But to get away from all of those accusations of you have an agenda, which really is for a journalist the worst thing you want to hear, we want to tell stories on television by the numbers. And it couldn't be a better numbers story than what we just lived through in this past election. But I'm also, to be honest with you, exhausted. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm exhausted after the election. And it's almost as if the exhaustion comes from the fact that so much of our media, much of it on television, is interested in fanning the flames of the divisions. And actually, if you think about it, our country really, I don't see it as that divided. There is a core that is really worried about the future of this country, but most of the rest of America really does get this new mainstream. My journalism wants to look at that fear and not fan the flames of it, but to understand it genuinely, curiously, with humility and respect. But things have changed in our country. The winner in our country now is American democracy. And I am so happy because I was so worried that it was going to be the loser in this election. But everybody has come out to vote, and it's making it difficult. Someone said to me, it's as if now that they've made it harder, you want it even more. And we certainly realize that and experience that. And the Latino vote, the power of the Latino vote, is an extraordinary story. It's not just a win for Latinos, queridos amigos. It's a win for all of us. When you have the fastest growing demographic group turning away from the democratic process, that's not a loss for them. It's a loss for all of us. So the fact that they are believing in the democratic process and going out is a win for all of us. So as journalists, yeah, we have to do better. I think John Chancellor would want us to do better in terms of being honest about what's happening with our country, but not fanning the flames of the division. And now, frankly, with this new America, the question becomes really, what does the mainstream media do with all of this? How representative does it become? So, from that kid who was hired by Jay Kernis to go work at NPR as the first Latina to work in that building, and I really didn't get any of the jokes at first. It was really strange, and those meetings were really hard, but I would force myself to just say, you have to raise your hand and bring up that story idea because you're representing right now, you gotta represent. And so I'd just be like, and the wonderful thing at Weekend Edition with Scott Simon was that oftentimes it wasn't a yes, go out and do that story. And so for me, this core value of owning your voice is a central value to have as a journalist. And I learned that, frankly, from my mom. When we were being raised in Hyde Park, my mom, a Mexican immigrant, my dad was a medical doctor devoted to research at the University of Chicago, and my mom just understood what injustice looked like as we were living through the civil rights movement on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park. And so she took me to see demonstrations where Cesar Chavez or Martin Luther King may have come, not because she identified with those particular people, but because she identified with the issue of injustice. And just juxtaposed to that was her experience in Mexico, right, where the media was not free. And my mom, as a kid, traveled all across Mexico. We have this term in Mexico called pata de perro, a dog's foot, which means that you just go everywhere all the time. And my grandmother and my mother and all of the family would always be going out, and they found this as an experience of erasing the borders between themselves and the people who had less than them in Mexico. And so my mom then taught us all about giving back. And so every time we'd go to Mexico, driving 5 days from Chicago to Mexico every year in the green station wagon, but it was packed with clothes and food that we would give away to those less fortunate. So the understanding of this core value of giving back was part of who I was. And understanding that this is also a core value of our democracy. All right, here's a moment where I'm going to insert just a funny story to make you all laugh. And then I'm going to finish up, because I know I was supposed to do this in 5 minutes, and it's maybe gone over a little bit more. So the real sacrifice, right, in our personal lives for what we do is the kids. And that was so beautiful, Mary, when you talked about what it was like to have a dad who wasn't around. So this is a call out to my kids. So, great story about when I was interviewing Sonia Sotomayor, Justice of the Supreme Court, and we were getting ready, we were in her chambers, and she was getting makeup on, and I also was having this surreal experience, and I told her, I said, this was a couple of years ago, and I said, well, Justice Sotomayor, you know, she was getting makeup, so we had to talk about something light. And I was like, you know, my daughter, she wants to wax her eyebrows, and she has these Frida Kahlo eyebrows, and I'm really having a problem with this. I'm not sure what to do. You know, how do I manage this? This is one of these identity questions, and Sonia Sotomayor said, let her wax. I was like, it's done. Jurema, Maria Jurema Guadalupe de los Indios Pérez Hinojosa, now is in complete control as a freshman at Fieldston, and is an amazing young woman, so that's a shout out for you. And for Raúl Ariel Jesús de Todos los Santos Pérez Hinojosa. Yeah, the two of you. For my son, Raúl Ariel Jesús de Todos los Santos Pérez Hinojosa, you'll all be quizzed on how to say that name when you leave. You know, he was my first and has been there kind of in all of the firsts as well. But I'll never forget when we happened to be in Cambridge shooting for WGBH and running into David Gergen. And I said to David, this is my son. You know, David's a very serious guy until you actually get to know him, and then he's like just like a softie. And I just said, it's my son. And David reached down, because he is, you know, he's very tall, and hugged my son, Raúl. Those are the moments that I know are transformational for my son, who I think is finding his own path, and perhaps may soon be running for president. I don't know. Could happen. No pressure, Raúl, no pressure. They are the ones who have borne the sacrifice of me not being around and always having to tell these important stories. So for me, I suppose that the greatest honor in being part of this family is that, and the lesson from Ira, and the lesson of perhaps where our country is right now, and it's a lesson that I actually got from the great American writer Sandra Cisneros, which is that multiculturalism or diversity means being able to see yourself in the person most unlike you. Being able to actually see yourself in the person most unlike you. And so whether it was you, Ira, who was seeing that with your black friends in Arkansas and Little Rock, or John Chancellor seeing himself in you, this is, I think, what we try to do, is to uplift the possibility that we can, in fact, see ourselves in each other. That we can, in fact, together build something extraordinary. So for me, this award says that I am, and it is really truly the greatest honor, because I once thought I had no voice in American journalism. And now, with this award, I am proud to be seen as part of that solid tradition of great American journalism that seeks truth to power, that sees ourselves in the most vulnerable and remains committed to telling those stories. The fact that I am part of that official group now with this John Chancellor Award just means the absolute world for me. So thank you so much for being here and staying so late. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Is this anything that you need? Maybe. It's the box. It's a nice box, though.